Hi there, it's Paige. I'm one of the Flourish experts in photography and graphic design and branding. I had a couple Flourish members send me images. I'm going to edit the first one. Pretty much my process for editing images is the same no matter what I'm editing. If I wasn't stopping to explain everything, this edit was pretty simple. It probably took me, it probably would take me somewhere between 30 seconds and a minute. I think once you get the hang of it, it'll start to become second nature for you. The programs I am using are all included in the photographer bundle from Adobe Creative Cloud, which includes the full version of Photoshop and the full version of Lightroom. I'm not using Lightroom because Lightroom is a resource hog. What I'm using are kind of the stripped down versions of Lightroom that they had before they came out with Lightroom, which is Adobe Bridge and Adobe Camera Raw. The reason I'm doing that is because if you don't have a computer that has a lot of RAM and the graphics card and everything for doing a lot of editing, excuse me, then Lightroom can kind of be a resource hog on your computer and kind of lag. So I just think it's better for a lot of reasons that are more technical than that to use Bridge and Camera Raw, but I'm not going to get into all of that because you don't need to know all that. You just need to know how to edit your images. So when you open the image, you're going to open it up first in Camera Raw. This is not actually a raw image, it is a JPEG. And so technically, I guess you could skip that part, but I'm still going to open it in Camera Raw because if you are taking raw images, it'll just apply to you. And so this is Adobe Camera Raw. If you've ever used Lightroom and you've seen their sliders, you'll see it has the same sliders. The first thing I'm going to do before I do anything in here is I'm going to go over to this camera button and I'm going to switch the camera calibration to 2010, the process here. There's kind of a long drawn out explanation for that, and I could go into all of that, but I really don't need to. Again, you just go here to camera, switch it to 2010. And you're going to want to do that if you want your sliders to match up to my sliders, because you'll see if I go back here and I switch it back to 2012, the sliders change. They're kind of moved around and changed, and they're a little different. Sorry. The first thing, this picture is a little underexposed. Usually I would change the white balance first, but because it's a little underexposed, I'm actually going to change the exposure first. And when I work on the image in Camera Raw, what I'm trying to do is just get a nice overall exposed picture. It's not going to be 100% right because there might be some areas that need a little extra love. I do that in Photoshop. So I just want to get a nice overall properly exposed picture. So I'm going to really pay attention to my histogram. Up here in your histogram, this kind of gives you a snapshot of the balance and the light balance of your image. So over here you have your whites. And over here you have your blacks. So if I take my exposure and I slide it all the way over here, you'll see that my histogram goes all the way over to this white side, and this is red because this is a clipping warning. So this red is showing me that these whites are clipped, which is bad. Same thing if I go to the blacks and I would slide it all the way over, my histogram moves to the left, and you have this blue, which is black clipping, and that's also no good. So you just want your image to be balanced. So I'm going to move my exposure up just until I start, I barely have any clipping, so I'm going to do that. And then, so this is kind of cool. It's kind of blue. I'm assuming the sign is supposed to be white, and the sign is kind of blue. White balance is a little subjective, but if something's white, it needs to look white. And monitors can kind of vary. If you don't have a calibrated monitor, your monitor may be a little cooler, a little warm. Just, try to do your best. Most people aren't like crazy and think, oh, that sign isn't white, exactly white. So, just get it as close as you can. You can always try auto first and see if you like what the auto is. Makes it way too cool. So the next thing you can do is you can use this little white balance tool, which is a little eyedropper, and you can select your neutral point. So if you have a neutral point, which is like just a neutral color, kind of a gray, and I think it's supposed to be like 80% gray, and again, that's a little bit more technical than we need to get, but you just click on it, and then you see if that looks better, and I think that looks pretty good. If you click somewhere that's like blue, it'll kind of give you like, if you're saying that's your neutral point, it's like way too blue, so it's gonna like really warm it up. So so if you don't have a neutral point in your picture, you can actually just adjust these sliders until you like what it's giving you, and until you get to where you feel, yeah, that looks pretty good. So I think that looks pretty good. But this picture is still a little dull. It's not bright. So I'm going to see, sometimes when you change the white balance, you'll have a little bit more wiggle room with your exposure, or vice versa. And I have a little bit more wiggle room with my exposure, so I'm going to go up a tiny bit. The next thing I'm going to adjust is my brightness, and just give it a little bit, a little bit more brightness, and make it a little airier. But you'll see that then when I do that, the blacks are kind of dull, so you can actually just adjust your blacks. You don't want to go too far, because you'll see here in this area, I'm starting to get a little bit of clipping. Sometimes clipping is okay, and I'm not printing this image, so I have a little bit more leeway. When you print an image, if something's clipped, it's just going to print pure black or pure white, so clipping is really bad, but your screen has such high, screens have such high resolution and everything, they can, you can see a little bit more, so it's not quite such a big deal. And this isn't really an important part of the picture, so the fact that this is clipped a little bit is not that big of a deal. So I think this looks good. Overall, it's exposed nicely. So what I am going to do is go down here, and I'm going to click Open Image, and that is going to open the image up in Photoshop. So now my image is opened in Photoshop, and when I look at this image overall, it is not horrible, but it is a little dull. The sign, which should really be popping here because this is what you're selling, is a little dull. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to selectively edit areas of the image. And I know that might seem like that's going to take a really long time, but it doesn't. So the way I do this is by using level adjustment layers. There's a couple ways that you can do levels, and I know a lot of people will go up to image and they'll go to adjustments and then they'll do levels. And basically what this does is it has a histogram, so this is the histogram of my image, and I can play with the histogram here and adjust it as so. Now, the problem with this, if I go ahead and, okay, so this isn't right at all, but let's say this is the adjustment that I wanted to make. The problem with this is it's actually made the adjustment here to my image. And the only way to make it go away is to go to undo. Where if I were to do the same thing with a levels adjustment, it's exactly the same, and I can go in here and edit it and do the exact same thing, except it's just making an adjustment layer on top of my original image. If I turn this off, it goes right back to the way the image was before. And this becomes helpful if you're doing a lot of adjustments to your image and then you get to a point where you're like, oh my gosh, something doesn't look right. You can go in and turn these off and on and find out which layer is giving you trouble. If you were making the adjustments directly to your background layer, you can't do that. You'd have to undo a whole bunch, and you may not be able to go all the way. You may just have to like close it and start over, or sometimes you even mess up the image, the original file, and you can't do anything. You've just messed up your file, which is not good at all. So that's why always, always, always use adjustment layers. So this one is obviously not good, so I'm going to turn it off. So when you do levels, you can do an overall adjustment to your picture, but since I'm going to just selectively adjust my picture and I want to see those selective adjustments as I do them, I'm going to use something called the Quick Mask tool. And what this is going to do is it's just going to select, I'm going to select a certain area of my image and make a selection of it, and then I'm going to be able to apply the adjustments to it. So usually when you do this, when you're doing this, you want to work from the biggest area to the smallest areas. So if I'm looking at this image, you can see right here, this half of the image is much brighter than this half of the image. So I want to kind of balance that out just a tad. And so the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to select over here, this is called the Quick Mask tool. And I'm going to double click on it so you can see how I have mine set up. So I have the color indicates the selected areas. So the color, when you paint over this or you make a selection, it's going to make the selection green, and you want it to be, that's the area that you're editing. So you want it to be selected area. I have mine set to green. I think the default's red. It doesn't matter. I mean, you can pick whatever color you want, but I like green. And the opacity is at 50%. I'm going to use the brush tool for this, and so I just right click so I have a standard brush. My hardness is at 0%, and the size changes depending on the size that you're editing. Changes there. Okay, so you turn on your Quick Mask, so it has it selected, and I am going to select this area where it's a little brighter. It can be kind of a sloppy selection. Then you're going to press the Quick Mask tool again. There's a keyboard shortcut. If you press Q, that'll turn it on, and then you press Q again, and it'll turn it off. So when you turn it off, it takes that green selection that I made, and it turns it into these marching ants. So now I have it selected, so I'm going to go to my layers. If you don't see where your layers are, you just go to Windows, Layers, and I'm going to go here to create a new fill or adjustment layer, and I'm going to select levels. So as you can see, it is giving me my histogram, but it's much different than the histogram I had for the overall image, because this area is, this area right here needs a little bit more contrast. So I'm going to pull that up, and as you can see, it kind of changes this area. I don't want to change it too much. I just want it to balance out with the other side of the image. So I'm just going to bring it up just a tiny bit here. But as you can see, it's more level now. So when I turn this off, you can see it doesn't make like a huge change, but it makes more of a level change. So the next part that I'm going to do is the actual sign. And I'm going to go into my Quick Mask selection mode again, and I'm just going to select the sign. If you need to change the size of your brush, you can use the brackets on your keyboard. So the left bracket makes it smaller, the right bracket key makes it bigger. So that's just a little shortcut. If you need to erase something, if you went too far outside the line, you can see here I have this black as my active color. If I press X, it'll make white my active color, and that'll erase it. You don't have to be completely perfect with your selection, so once you have that selected, go ahead and press Q again, then make another levels adjustment layer, and I'm going to bring this up all the way this time because I really want that sign to pop out. And I also have just a tiny bit of room here on the other side of the histogram. And move that in, and you can see that just really made the lettering on the sign really pop. It went from being gray back to being black. So that actually looks really good, but I have these mason jars that I love here, and I want to make them pop out a little bit more. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my quick selection mode, and I'm going to select each jar individually and apply the levels layer, and I'm just going to bring the handles in on both sides till it reaches the end of the histogram. And that's just going to make those, add some contrast to those jars and make them pop. All right, so there you have it. I think this looks good. You have your sign pop. These mason jars look better, and the image doesn't look so flat anymore. And I'm just gonna, you don't have to do this, but I'm just gonna group these real quick just to show you. This was before, and this is after. So before, everything's kind of flat, and after,